Is just reviewing factoring and making sure you have a good understanding of how to factor basic problems. The first thing you need to know is what the GCF is. That's the greatest common factor. It's the biggest number that goes into each term slash number. When possible, it's important to take out the GCF. And when you do this, this is just the opposite of the distributive property. The reason we do this is because it's easier to solve problems when you have smaller numbers. And by taking things out, like the greatest common factor, it'll make it easier in the long run. Okay, so when I look at this first problem, I have a 5 and a 20. The biggest number that goes into 5 and 20 is 5. The next thing I look at is that I have 2 x's here and 1 x here. I take away 1 x because I have 1 here, and you always take away the minimum amount. So I take an x. Now, when I'm factoring the backwards distributive property, all it is, really what I'm doing is I'm dividing. 5 divided by 5, so that's why I wrote it here. 5 divided by 5 is just 1. X squared divided by x. I had 2. I took 1 out, so I'm left with 1. And then I do the same thing here. I divide. 20 divided by 5 is 4, and the x's are gone. So that's that factored out. And technically, you don't have to have that 1. You could just have 5x, open parentheses, x plus 4, close parentheses. For the second one, the big thing I want you to focus on here is the negative. Whenever this first thing is negative, it must be a negative that you factor out. They don't both have to be a negative, but if your leading number is negative, then it needs to be negative, okay? So the biggest number that goes into 12 and 18 is 6, so I'm going to take out a negative 6. Now I look at my x's. I have 1 x here and none here. So the least amount of x's I have is none, so I can't take any out. So I'm just going to factor out a negative 6. Negative 12 divided by negative 6 is a positive 2. I had an x. I didn't take 1 out, so I'm left with x. Now, negative 18 divided by negative 6 is a positive 3. And you can always double check your work by distributing. Negative 6 times 2x gives me negative 12x. Negative 6 times 3 gives me negative 18. Okay. Last one I'm going to do, if you notice I have the negative, so I know I have to factor out a negative. The biggest number that goes into 4 and into 2 is 2. I have 2 x's here and 1 here, so I take out the least amount, which is 1. Negative 4 divided by negative 2 is 2. I had 2 x's, but I took 1 out, so I'm left with 1x. 2 divided by negative 2 is negative 1. I had an x, but I took it out, so I'm left with no x's. And there's the answer. And again, you could distribute to make sure you understand it and you got it right. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to work on the problems on the left. So these are 2 problems. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to try them. So hit pause, try them, and come back when you think that you have it ready. Okay, so you should have noticed that the biggest number you could take out is a 5, so I'm left with 3x, because 15 divided by 5 is 3. So it's going to be 3x plus 25 divided by 5 is 5. And that's that factored. You should have also recognized for this one I had a negative, so I had to take out a negative. I had 2 x's and 1 x, so I had to take out an x. If I have a negative but I took it out, it's positive, and so I'm left with 1x. 4 divided by negative 1 is a negative 4. I had an x, but the x is outside, so I close it, and that's the answer. The next type of problem we have to do is we have to be able to solve. Okay. Now, when you solve, it's important that it equals 0. If this does not equal 0, then you have to move things so they equal 0. Okay? Once you know that it equals 0, You cover up the equal 0, and you factor. So go ahead and factor that problem right there. Good. When you factored, you should have had x, and x plus 4 equals 0. Now what you do is you say that each of these things equals 0. X equals 0. Well, that's done. All the numbers are by itself. It's just x, so that's the one answer. The next answer is x plus 4 equals 0. Well, to get rid of a plus 4, you minus 4, so x is negative 4. Now you might notice that the answer, negative 4, is the opposite of parentheses. Remember, I've talked about that a lot this year, is that if it's always the opposite of parentheses, and 99% of the time it's going to work, then it's the opposite of parentheses. So you know that if it's a positive 4, when I get my actual answer, it's going to be negative 4. Because to get rid of a plus 4, you minus 4. All right, why don't you look at the second one? Take a chance to go ahead and factor it. And once you factor it, see if you can solve it. And then come back to the video. Okay, so I factor it. 2 goes into 2 and into 10, so I took out a 2. I had 2 x's here and 1 here, so I was able to take out 1. So I'm left with 2x, parentheses x minus 5. So I set each of those factors equal to 0, so I get 2x is 0. To get rid of a times 2, I divide by 2, but that's still going to give me 0, so 0 is my first answer. The second answer is going to be x minus 5 equals 0. To get rid of a minus 5, I add 5, so x is a positive 5. Okay. Now, sometimes you're going to have problems where things don't line up correctly, and so let's do one of those to make sure you understand what happens. So I get 3x squared equals 12x. Now again, in order to do these, they have to equal 0. So I'm going to have to move this over here. And to move a positive 12x over, you're going to subtract 12x. And now you have a problem you should be able to do. Okay? So factor it and try and see if you can solve it, and then come back and check your work. Okay? So go ahead and look and see what I did. I took out a 3x, so I'm left with 3x and x minus 4. And then I set each of those equal to 0. Okay. Let's go back to the other page. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be factoring trinomials, things when we have an x squared and then a x and a constant, a c. So let me zoom out so you can see these steps. Step 1 is to always look for the greatest common factor, and if you find that, take it out. The reason we want to take it out is because it makes our numbers smaller, and it's always easier to work with smaller numbers. Okay? All right, so step 2 is determine the factors of C, and then figure out if you're going to add or subtract. Something happened when I printed this. I guess my circle moved or changed size. I actually want to circle the plus. So I'm looking for my factors of 40. So 1 and 40. I'm going to go in order so I know I'm done. 2 and 20. The next one would be 3, but 3 doesn't go into 40. So 4 and 10, and then 5 and 8. And I know I'm pretty much done because the only numbers left are 6 and 7, and neither of those numbers go into 40. So now I look at my factor list, and I see which of these add to give me 13. And so it's these. So I know I have a 5 and an 8. Well, the only way I can get a positive 13 is if I have a positive 5 and a positive 8. And so that is what that looks like factored. If I were to FOIL this out again, I would get x squared plus 13x plus 40. All right, so before we do a bunch of practicing, let's look at these things to remember. Let's zoom in a little bit. If the last sign is a plus sign, both signs are the same. So if the last sign is a plus, both your signs are positives or both your signs are negative. The signs are the same as the middle number. So if your middle number is positive, then they're both positive. If your middle number is negative, then they're both negative. Okay? The second rule is if the sign is minus, because it can only be two options, it could be plus or minus, then the middle term takes the sign of the bigger number. And once we do some, you'll understand what I mean by this. Okay, so we got a little bit of space down here, so we're going to write a couple problems down here. And so I have x squared minus 8x plus 15, and x squared minus 3x minus 28. Okay? Well, I'm looking for my factors of 15 that add to give me 8. So my factors of 15 are 1 and 15 and 3 and 5. Which of these add to give me 8? I don't worry about negatives or anything like that. I just kind of think about it as adding or subtracting, and that's 3 and 5. So I know I'm going to have a 3 and I'm going to have a 5. Once I have my numbers in, that's when I start to think about my signs. And since I added, they have to be the same. So these are both positives or both negatives. Well, since I have a negative 8, they're both going to be negatives. Okay. Same thing over here. I think of my factors of 28 that subtract to give me 3. So 1 and 28, 2 and 14, 3 and 7. Not 3 and 7, but 4 and 7. 3 times 7 is 28. Okay, so those ones that subtract to give me 3 is 4 and 7. So I know I'm going to have a 4, and I know I have a 7. It doesn't matter the order of these, as long as you have the right sign. So I could have put the 7 first and then the 4. It will still give us the same answer. Now, I'm subtracting, so that means I have to have different signs. The only way I can get a negative 3 is if my bigger number is negative, and then it's a plus. Okay. So again, as long as it says x minus 7 and x plus 4, the order doesn't matter. I can do our last 4 problems. So you should be able to do the first 3 okay. The fourth one, number 9, you're going to have to take out a GCF. Okay? So try each of those problems and press pause so you can try them, and then come back and see how you did. Okay, so I went ahead and I have this, but I want the numbers that work, but I want to talk about what the sign is. So the factors of 10 that add to give me 7 are 5 and 2. The only way I can get a positive 7 is if they're both positives. Okay, here, the factors of 6 that subtract to give me a 1, well, that's 3 and 2. The only way I can get a negative 3 is if I have, or I'm sorry, a negative 1 is if I have a negative 3 and a positive 2. And then this one, the factors of 12 that add to give me 7, well, that's 3 and 4. And the only way I can get a negative 7 is if they're both negative. All right, and then the last one, 4 went into each of these things, so I divided by 4. Now I have to find the factors of 2 that add to give me 3. Bring the 4 down. And so the factors of 2 that add to give me 3 are 1 and 2. And the only way I can get a plus 3 is a positive 1 and a positive 2. Okay, so there's different types of factoring. The more you do, the better you'll get. But I suggest watching this again or practicing and making sure you do your homework to make sure you understand and you get better at these.